Week 7 was an instant classic. We saw phenomenal games across the board. The devil was slain in Cleveland, and we saw a Super Bowl rematch. Truly sensational stuff all around. Starting these off, though, the best division in football, the NFC North, saw their two top contenders square off in a battle for supremacy. And unfortunately, the Lions won that battle. A great game of football played by them all around. Their defense stepped up when they needed to, generated pressure on Sam Darnold, forced him to throw two clutch incomplete passes, non-clutch rather, on a two-point conversion at third down. Gave them the ball late, allowed them to drive down and make a field goal. Jared Goff, surgical, picked an elite Vikings defense apart effortlessly, and all in all, a really complete game from the Lions. It could have even gone better for them if they didn't run a stupid fake punt and basically hand the Vikings 7 points to start the game. Detroit looked phenomenal. Minnesota had some areas of weakness. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's pretty clear the Lions are the best team in the NFC and arguably the best team in the NFL. Hard to gauge how good the Chiefs are, given how ugly they look in all their wins. But topic for later. What did you think of the Lions, Tristan?
The Lions or Vikings in general? Because the only takeaway you can have from this game as an NFL fan, a fan of the NFC, a fan of these two teams specifically, is that these are the top two contenders in the NFC, with the Packers following them close behind, and maybe the Commanders also, with how good their offense has been under Jaden Daniels. With that being said, both of these teams have the ability to generate pressure, create sacks in big moments, create turnovers in big moments when need be. Both of these teams have the ability to run the ball. The Lions averaged 5.3 yards a carry, the Vikings 6.6 yards a carry. Both these quarterbacks, in this game specifically, and also over the course of the season, incredibly efficient. Jared Goff, 3 incompletions. Sam Darnold, 5 incompletions, added another 39 yards on the ground. So when these teams are operating at their absolute best, their potential on offense and their potential on defense, they're the two best teams in the NFC. And from what we've seen from each of them so far, I think it would be another coin flip if they played in the playoffs in a championship game. And these would be the two favorites with the other two teams I mentioned.
I don't think you can really put the Packers in the same conversation. Minnesota went into Lambeau Field and beat them in a close game. I don't think they'll lose at home later in the year. And the Lions have too good of a rushing attack for the Packers. We saw they performed against Joe Mixon this week. Get into that later. It really is these two teams, unless you think the 49ers somehow can pull it together when Christian McCaffrey comes back. But they're the two top dogs. Look at Minnesota. Jefferson, phenomenal game. Multiple really high-level elite catches. One on the sideline, one for a touchdown. Spectacular stuff from him as usual. Darnold did not play his best game. Obviously better than his performance last week in London against the Jets. Had that bad interception to Brian Branch. Couldn't quite get it in his guys' hands late when it really mattered. The decision-making, though, generally solid. Very well performed game. Threw a few balls downfield, which you just didn't see from the previous quarterback in town. The O-line played great, generated a lot of holes, which Aaron Jones capitalized on. And defensively, it is hard to get pressure on Jared Goff. The Vikings were able to do that consistently throughout the day. Goff just happens to be able to stand up to that blitz, hide behind the best O-line in football, and deliver to his receivers who always seem to be open short. We saw the blueprint for beating Minnesota this week. Pick them apart underneath, have a quarterback who can stand in the pocket, diagnose the blitz, and find his guys. If other teams who play them in the playoffs or in the regular season can do that, they'll probably beat the Vikings. But I don't see too many teams holding up to that front seven, holding up to that blitz, holding up to Flores. Like you said, two best teams in the NFC, maybe the two best teams in football. And looking ahead at the remainder of their schedules, the next game for the Minnesota Vikings is their most important. They play the Rams on Thursday night. Then they play the Colts, Jaguars, Titans, Bears, Cardinals, Falcons, Bears, and Seahawks again. I think you'd agree that is a pretty soft slate of games.
With the way they've played, certainly.
I just say, Andrew, like you look at the Bears, they're probably the best team on that schedule, but Caleb Williams does not perform well against really elite defense, and maybe the Falcons, but we just saw they performed against the Seahawks. You look at the Lions, though, they play the Titans next week, then they get the Packers, Texans, Jaguars, Colts, Bears, Packers, Bills, Bears, and 49ers to close the season out. Just because Detroit won this game, I don't think they're going to have the advantage in the division for the rest of the year. That Week 18 matchup between these two will probably be for the NFC North and for that 1 seed.
But I've belabored the point already how good they have been, and the biggest reason for that is I also think they're two of the most complete rosters in the NFL. True number 1 elite receiver, very good number 2 receiver. When the Vikings get TJ Hawkinson back, they'll have a top tight end in the NFL, just like the Lions do with Sam Laporta. They have a quarterback who's playing at a high level, good offensive line, good defense. There's not many other teams you can point to in the NFL from a a roster perspective with the way these two teams are playing that really match up when it comes to being a complete team.
One of those teams, too, you could argue matches up, though, is the Green Bay Packers, who at Lambeau beat the Houston Texans in a fairly close game. And it took an absolute stinker from CJ Stroud for them to do it. His worst performance as a professional so far. Stephon Diggs, 7 targets, 23 yards after chatting up the entire Packers roster prior to the game. Spectacular stuff from him. Jordan Love, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, falling into that gunslinger archetype, just throwing it 50 yards downfield and hoping somebody gets open. This really is a good Packers team. It'd probably win the division last year if it was in the NFC North. Unfortunately, the rest of their division got better. A win over the Texans helps. Their matchups against the Lions will probably determine if they can compete for that title spot. But all in all, the Packers, it's hard to argue they're also an elite team.
The Packers are an elite team by every stretch of the imagination. All of the hype their young talent got heading into the season, they've been living up to it. Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft is really making a name for himself at tight end. They have been very good. Defensively, they have been phenomenal. They are leading the NFL in takeaways. There's just one major flaw with this team. They're turning the ball over at way too high of a rate, and that is their flaw when it comes to playing other elite teams in the NFL. When they play a Detroit Lions or the Vikings, if they were to play someone like the Ravens, or if they even play the Commanders, who have an elite offense in the playoffs, if they keep turning the ball over at the rate that they are, they're not going to be able to beat these teams, and these elite offenses are going to be able to take advantage of that. So I think they have the potential to be a Super Bowl contender. I mean, with missing 2 games this season, Jordan Love's on pace to throw for 45 touchdowns, which is absurd. So they have all the talent in the world. I think they can make it to the Super Bowl with that talent, but the rate at which they're turning the ball over 7 games into the season removes some of that confidence for me.
I mean, we say this every year about Josh Allen and the Bills, and they play a really good team in the playoffs, and it's not Josh Allen's turnovers which cost them the game. Assuming they can buckle that up, they will probably win 12, 13 games. I don't think it's that big of an issue. You would like the opposing team's offense to be able to capitalize, but if you can have the turnovers, you're willing to take those risks and accept the burden of handing it back to an opposing offense, you can still be very successful. Jordan Love played a great game despite those turnovers. He can play winning football with them, and just because the modern NFL has become so turnover averse doesn't mean it is a recipe for failure. I think the Packers will be just fine. The turnovers are not the concern. The lack of a run defense is the concern for this team. Joe Mixon had his way with this front 7. Aaron Jones earlier in the year did the exact same thing. If you were going to beat the Packers, you were going to do it by ramming it down their throat. Unfortunately for them, the NFC is the superior running back conference. Any team they face in the playoffs, the Eagles, the Commanders, the Vikings, the Lions, is going to have an elite rushing attack and really just going to capitalize on that front 7. The turnover's not an issue. The inability to stop the run, big issue.
It's a problem for their team, but you spoke to the Texans a little bit, so I want to elaborate my opinion on them. I think it's become very clear who the Texans are 7 weeks into the season. They are a very good team that certainly will win the AFC South, but they're not a great team, and they're not an elite team in the NFL that can contend with the Chiefs, the Ravens, the top dogs we've mentioned on the NFC side of things, because their offense feels completely disjointed, discombobulated, way too reliant on Joe Mixon's ability to run the ball. When Nico Collins is in the offense, way too reliant on Nico Collins, and all the offseason additions that they made are not coming to fruition of mainly Stephon Diggs. Like, he has not been able to step into Nico Collins' shoes.
Yeah, say Joe Mixon's playing great. Like that's the offseason edition, which has really worked out. That one's all right.
And what I mean by that specifically is I really thought the offense was going to take the next step like we saw them start to do towards the end of last season, and that clearly hasn't happened. They haven't been picking teams apart through the air. They haven't been jumping out to big leads with CJ Stroud taking the next step. Maybe the sophomore slump is sort of a thing, which you mentioned heading into the season, I believe, and that's coming to fruition a little bit. Their pass blocking as a team has not been all that great in this game. The Packers front 7 did get to him quite a bit. So I think the Texans, they're not quite there yet, and that's going to be the story of their season, especially when they're in all these one-score games. The only non-one-score games they've had were their blowout win against the Patriots and when they got blown out against the Vikings. And when you play good teams down the stretch, especially in the playoffs, if you're winning by those thin of margins, the odds of making it to the Super Bowl are not great.
You got to be able to win one-score games if you want to contend for the Super Bowl. To push back a little bit, their defense, first and foremost, been playing great. Danielle Hunter, very good acquisition, helping Will Anderson get open and uncovered in ways he simply never has before as a rookie. Offensively, they've been dealing with injuries. We have not seen much of Nico Collins, their true top dog, number one receiver, and Joe Mixon coexisting on the field. Collins will be back later in the year. That will help Stroud play better. That will make Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs look a lot better, thanks to them going up against number 2 and number 3 cornerbacks instead of Jair Alexander. And I'm not willing to abandon all hope yet. I'd like to see them healthy, but Stroud has to play better. He has to take that next step. The only game he has really looked elite in, as you said, was that Jaguars game. Staying in the NFC North for the final team on bye this week, the Chicago Bears. I'm not trying to sound like a hater. They've got a very good defense, arguably the best in the division. I just don't think they quite compare to the other 3 teams. They got a winning record. They've got no impressive wins, though. They're beating up on bad teams. Caleb Williams has not been truly tested and succeeded against an elite defense. And I feel if they play the Packers, the Vikings, and the Lions, maybe they split those series, but they're not sweeping them. They're not winning the NFC North. And they're going to be in a tough spot to make the playoffs with how hard their schedule gets down the stretch.
I don't even think it's a slight to say they don't really compare to the other teams, because you take a look at the Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, those all feel, from what we've seen them put on the field, like 12-win-plus teams. Will it happen because they all play each other? Probably not. But the Bears, from what we've seen, when they play good teams and what Caleb Williams has shown against better defenses and the whole, rookie quarterback thing, getting used to the NFL, that offense meshing and gelling, they feel more like an 8 to 10 win team, in my opinion. So they haven't looked as good as those other teams, but if they were in the NFC South, if they were in the NFC West, or even the NFC East, maybe they are winning the division right now.
Especially the NFC East, especially the NFC East.
Well, the Commanders are very
good, but they've been picking on bad defenses for the most part. I think I'd take... We'll see this matchup play out if Jaden Daniels is healthy next week. I think I would take Chicago over the Commanders right now because they are an incomplete team.
That's just my point, is the Bears are very good, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and I don't think this season is a loss by any stretch of the imagination if they only win 8 or 9 games and miss out on the wild card berth because they finish 4th behind 3 of the 3 best teams in the NFC.
The problem the solution they're going to run into, who in the NFC is coming up and taking that final wildcard spot from them? Because we assume some combination of the Vikings, Lions, and Packers get at least 2 of them. What team from the NFC West plays well enough to get 9-10 wins, grab that spot? What team from the NFC East besides I guess the Eagles conceivably.
The Eagles and whoever's in second between the Buccaneers and Falcons would be the biggest challenge for the final wild card spot, I think.
I will feel very differently about this statement I'm about to make, depending on how badly the Ravens beat up on the Buccaneers tonight. I could see all 4 teams from the North making the playoffs this year. I just don't think the NFC is good enough to stop them from doing that. It would take a really impressive backstretch from Caleb Williams. He'd have to keep playing how he's played against bad defenses against the remainder of his schedule.
I could see it. The odds of it happening, though, when they all have to play each other a few more times, doesn't feel all that likely, especially when you have a team like the Eagles where if they get in the swing of things, they can easily get to 10, 11 wins with a Saquon Barkley dominant run game against a weak division where the Cowboys and Giants are reeling from injuries. Their defenses, or the Cowboys specifically, their defense is pathetic. The Commanders, maybe they steal a game against them if the Eagles get things going on the offensive side of the ball.
I don't even know if it'd be stealing a game. I think they might be projected to beat them if they were playing right now, but we're getting away from things here. All in all, best division in football. We don't need to belabor the point. We were right about going into the year. What else is new? Moving on to the Super Bowl rematch. The 49ers taking on the Chiefs. And I'm not going to say abandon all hope for San Francisco, but boy, they are coming up real fast on the edge of that cliff. The lemmings that are in that organization are starting to jump off. This team does not look good. Their defense could not stop the run. Their offense, non-existent once Brandon Ayuk went down. I have no expectations for any game they're going to be in for the remainder of the year. I'm sure they're going to win some. They're a talented team, well coached, but you just can't look at this team and be inspired. You can't have much hope in the 49ers. Brock Purdy is in a really bad spot, which is a strange thing to say given the narrative surrounding him coming into this year. But he is throwing to George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk. There is not much else on this team right now. It is hard for any offense to win games with a mediocre O-line, with no star receivers, no good receivers, and Jordan Mason, who I'm sorry is a one-dimensional running back. It's a hell of a dimension to have. He is great up the middle, but he does not have that outside game, that agility, that explosiveness someone like Christian McCaffrey has. You know where he's going to be carrying the ball most effectively. The 49ers are in a bad spot. I can't justify them winning their division, making the playoffs in my mind. I just can't see it happening now. Will they? Potentially. It's a weak division. They can probably bully the Seahawks again. All in all, though, just a pathetic team right now.
I've lost any real faith I ever had in the 49ers to make it back to the Super Bowl or make serious noise in the playoffs, because each week we get more information about them and the narrative is becoming more and more true that they cannot score when they get to the red zone. They are still struggling to put up points. Now they lost the receiver. They just gave $30 million. Deebo Samuel, he's out with an illness this past week, so you hope he's going to be brought back in. But the only way the 49ers can possibly be saved is if Christian McCaffrey's Achilles tendonitis and both Achilles suddenly is completely gone and he's able to step onto the field and magically save their red zone offense and help them put the ball in the end zone. Because if he's not able to do that, if the rookie Ricky Pearsall is not able to step in and be productive in place of Brandon Ayuk, and Juwan Jennings can come back from his injury and be productive, there's no hope for this 49ers team, especially when their defense has been worse than it has been in previous years and has been giving up points to these better offenses that they've played.
I don't know if the 49ers defense is substantially worse. I think it's more so they're being left out on the field much longer. I don't want to point at the defense and say, oh, look at you guys, you stayed. They got a strong defensive player of the year candidate leading their linebacking room. They got Nick Bosa. They got elite players in their secondary.
It's not a defensive collapse. I'm not making that argument.
I'm just saying, I think their defense is just about on the same level. Maybe a little bit worse coach. Maybe they're getting Salah this offseason to lead that unit again. But all their issues fall on the offense and really fall on injuries. It's hard to look at this 49ers team and say, oh, well, they wouldn't be good if they had Deebo Samuel, Ayuk, McCaffrey, Williams 100% healthy. This would be one of the best teams in the NFC competing with the Lions and the Vikings, if not for being ravaged by injuries and having their star receiver or their first round receiver get shot in the chest. Looking at the Chiefs, what do you want us to say, man? They're undefeated. They look terrible while doing it. Patrick Mahomes has legitimately been performing on a Daniel Jones level as a passer in recent weeks. Part of that is due to the receivers. Part of that is just him making bad reads in general. Now, I don't think you
Well, there's a ball tipped at the line of scrimmage and intercepted this past week.
Yeah, it's almost like a defensive tackle was sticking his big, meaty hand up in the air and was, oh, I'll just throw through that sucker. Come on, man. 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. The play on the sideline, which has generated some controversy. It's not why the 49ers lost, but being objective here, players do tend to pull up on Mahomes near the sideline because we've seen him get hit inbounds while he's going out and that be a 15-yard penalty. Oh, shut up, man. Like, your desire to kiss the shield makes me sick sometimes. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to other quarterbacks, but because Mahomes is so shifty, he benefits from it more than most other people. That is the...
Are you referencing the Bengals-Chiefs hit specifically?
No, I'm referencing the Packers hit where he got absolutely crushed with 2 feet in bounds. Different style. I'm not talking about the Bengals game.
He was out of bounds.
I have no love lost over the Cincinnati Bengals getting screwed one way or the other. But it's a rough state of affairs for the rest of the league. Their defense is probably the best in football right now. Hard to say if it's them, the Vikings, somebody else, but there is no stopping this team unless Chris Jones, Andy Reid, or Patrick Mahomes get hurt.
Well, if you want to be super nitpicky, the Chiefs haters, the box score watching nerds, they'll point out Patrick Mahomes' lack of statistical production, by far the worst statistical season of his career, and point to why the Chiefs are not going to repeat, why they're not as good as their record might say, why the Vikings or Lions or other teams that have been dominant are better teams in the NFL. NFL, but every team they've played this season, they find a way to beat. Week 1 against the Ravens, Mahomes did throw for over 300. Against the Bengals, the offense found a way to be very productive when they needed to. Against the Saints, they made the Saints look like a JV team on the defensive side of the ball. So defensively, they beat you into submission with how talented their team is. They didn't really need L'Jarius Sneed, it turns out, who's been not very good on the Titans by any stretch of the imagination. But this Chiefs team beats you down defensively. Chris Jones is just as good as prime Aaron Donald ever was for the Rams. And when
No. We don't get to say stupid stuff like that and get it just glossed over. Aaron Donald had 20 effing sacks in the season the one year they got someone else they couldn't double team next. And when they had Ndamukong Suh, Aaron Donald was the best defensive player ever. Chris Jones is really good, but let's not do that.
The effect that Chris Jones has on the game is just as good as what Aaron Donald had for the Rams.
Wrong.
He suffocates teams. He makes the whole Chiefs defensive game plan go, and that's why their defense is as great as it is. And then on offense, when your defense is that suffocating, you have Andy Reid, you have Patrick Mahomes. It's kind of like the Steelers in a way where they suffocate you on defense, but then they have the quarterback and that coach on the offensive side of the ball to make sure they score enough points to beat the other team and do it in dominant fashion. So the Chiefs, they still would be my best team in the NFL over the Vikings, Lions, and whatever we got going on
Just
in the NFC North and
a
Ravens.
Slobmaster 8,000 on Chris Jones' considerable package we saw at the Combine. Have some shame, man. The real issue with the Chiefs is I think the Ravens conceivably could beat them now that they've actually incorporated Derrick Henry into that offense. The Chiefs benefited heavily from playing the Ravens in Week 1. But you look at the remainder of their schedule, they play the Buffalo Bills, which with Amari Cooper and given how the Bills performed against them in the regular season, now Josh Allen in general performs against them, I could see them losing that game. That is a fair game for them to win. The Chargers, with how injured they were and how close they played the Chiefs early in Week 14, if they're healthy, I could see the Chargers picking off the Chiefs. And then there's the Houston Texans, which we've talked about them already. If they can get their offense healthy and Joe Mixon is still on the field and performing in Week 16, the Chiefs are a little banged up, I could see them potentially beating the Chiefs. But then you were looking at a 14-3 team, unless you want to throw in a loss to the Steelers in there in Week 17, a 14-3 team who is going to have one of the biggest home field advantages in football in the playoffs. The Ravens have to win out in order to stop the Chiefs from having home field advantage over them. And I'm sorry, but no team in the AFC is going into Arrowhead, even the Ravens, who I think very highly of, and beating them in the playoffs. So as things stand now, it unfortunately appears the Chiefs are going back to the Super Bowl.
And like I said, they could even drop 4 games over the rest of the regular season. That's not as important. Getting that 1 seed certainly is extremely important, because if they do have to travel to Baltimore, that's where things get a little hairy, especially if the Ravens just commit to their game plan and don't do what they did against the Chiefs last year in the playoffs and completely go away from the run and get completely thrown out of the building by the Chiefs defense.
A sad state of affairs in football in general. Something to make us all happy, though, keeping things in the AFC North since we've been talking so much about the Ravens. Deshaun Watson is down. The devil's dead. The demon has been slain. His Achilles has popped. And some people would say we should never celebrate injuries. I would say you people should have never been celebrating a serial sexual predator in the first place. We do not need to browbeat down on Cleveland Browns fans. They realize the error of their ways. Looking forward at Cleveland, though.
I want to beat down on the Browns
You want to beat them a little bit. You can reference the photo show. Tristan, the entire NFL is just shaming the Browns right now. I've been doing it myself. I've indulged in it a little bit. It does not need to continue to be done. They get the point. They're lying about not supporting Deshaun Watson, pretending there wasn't mass support for him. That deserves to be ridiculed. But looking ahead at Cleveland, Jameis Winston's definitely a better quarterback, has his own issues, unpopular with coaching staffs due to his idiot tendencies. That stuff drives guys like Kevin Stefanski crazy. They can win a crispy 2-3 games, have a little bit of fun, so long as they're not rolling out DTR. But this is one of the 2 worst teams in football. If the Panthers did not lose by 33 points to a Marcus Mariota-led Commanders team, I would say this is the worst team in football. A sad state of affairs, pathetic all around. Shame on the Bengals for being in a close game with this team. Although Watson was 15 for 17 at one point, so maybe he was finally turning it around. We were witnessing the resurgence of Deshaun Watson, then God stepped in and just powed his Achilles.
Through a lightning bolt.
Exactly.
Right at his Achilles.
The sod monster reached up out of the Cleveland ground. The ghost of the river fire just
Karate chopped it.
Just karate chopped them. There's not right. What do we need to say about the Browns, man? We're done talking about them for the rest of the year. What more can be said?
The fan base is pathetic, and the organization deserves what they had coming to them. They cheered for when they traded for Deshaun Watson, got rid of Baker Mayfield. They thought they had the next electric quarterback that could lead the Browns to the promised land on their hands, take them out of the misery they've endured for years. He's been horrible. The injury, you're not getting out of the contract. I think there's some cap relief on this season with some injury insurance they purchased, but you're never getting rid of him. The only silver lining to this injury is that if you're a Browns fan, it gives your front office a little bit of more excuse they can make to themselves, moving off of Deshaun Watson as the team's future plans, that they can draft a quarterback with the top 3 pick.
And
They're
the front
never
office
going
ain't
to
going to be there by this time.
whichever front office is there, because we know the ownership has been making Stefanski start Deshaun Watson, whatever Stefanski's saying or not. But now it's several seasons in a row where Deshaun Watson has suffered significant injuries, not been able to play, aside from his play on the field, and ownership, if they're somewhat intelligent, should at least be able to justify to himself, even with all of the money they're going to wind up still paying, that they need to have someone in their back pocket that is talented and can win them games, because the health is also just a major concern at this point.
Aside from the complete lack of production on the field, that opens up the question, though, what quarterback gets stuck drafted into this dumpster fire? Does Cam Ward fall on a sword, go behind this bad offensive line with non-existent receivers? Does Shedeur Sanders get shackled?
Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland would be hilarious.
The one thing I'll say, for Deion's been a lot better as a coach this year, and I'm not seeing as many stupid clips from him. That is the one team I will fully support him stepping up and saying, no, neither of my kids are going to this effing dumpster fire of an organization. It's not happening. You can throw your weight around a little bit there. Like, I don't know how many years of eligibility Shedeur has left. Can he get like a quadra-COVID super duper senior year in there? I would go play at, not even Colorado. I'd go back to Jackson State before I let my kid play at Cleveland.
It probably will. With the way quarterbacks have looked, it will be Shedeur or Cam Ward at this point, with Milroe, Beck, and Ewers completely playing himself out of the first round.
No, Beck's played all right outside the first half most of these games. Like, if you can get over Carson Beck's disaster classes in the first half of most games, he's really good.
It's not enough to be a top 5 pick.
You'd be surprised. Quarterback is a very important position. Anyway, Seahawks Falcons. What is this, our final game that we're going to talk about for the week?
We got the Jets Steelers.
Oh, goody, the Jets Steelers. Seahawks Falcons. Back a few weeks ago, I talked about, well, Kirk didn't look great against the Panthers. It's kind of what he does. He plays down to his competition, and occasionally he's just going to go out there and lay an egg. This was one of those eggs. 3 turnovers, not productive through the air against a weak Seahawks secondary who's getting carried by name value from college. Tyreek Woolen, Witherspoon, not that good in the NFL except for this week. Just a bad showing all in all. The ceiling of the Atlanta Falcons is the same ceiling the Minnesota Vikings have had for a long time. They're never really going to be able to just outpass you, come back in a meaningful way against a really good team, and their defense is not particularly special. The front seven in particular just cannot generate pressure, even against a weak, terrible Seahawks offensive line. Couldn't get after Geno Smith at all, and now the division is back in play for the Buccaneers. If they pull off an upset over the Ravens tonight, they could definitely wind up winning the NFC South, getting that automatic 3 or 4 seed into the playoffs. Bad showing all around from the Falcons, and you owe the Seahawks an apology.
I don't owe the Seahawks an apology.
You cannot get on TikTok and smugly say, Kirk Cousins is going to pick his secondary apart, and then have it thrown in your face.
I made one smug comment about Kirk Cousins in the Falcons offense. It does not mean I'm at all shocked by the outcome. I still love Kenneth Walker. I still like DK Metcalf. I am a Geno Smith fan. The Seahawks have a lot of pieces on offense, and when they are on, they are a top 10 offense in the NFL, potentially top 5 offense in the NFL. So them putting up, what is it? How many points they scored?
34.
34 points. It does not come as a shock to me.
The offense did not put up 34 points. Big Kirko gave him a nice little fumble 6, but
and it's not like they really just rode a wave of momentum throughout the course of the game. It was not dominant from start to finish. Young Hoku missed a kick when they were just down 3-0. That would have tied up the game. Right before halftime, credit to Geno Smith, made a big throw to DK Metcalf. And then later in the second half, we have the fumble from a completely immobile Kirk Cousins. He throws an interception that is tipped off Drake London's hands into the safety's hands behind him, then has an overthrow interception late. So kind of just started bad early with a missed kick by Young Hoku, and it just got worse and worse from there. So when it comes to beating other elite teams in the NFL or teams that will be contending for the NFC Championship, I don't have all that much confidence in the Seahawks yet. I think it is going to be really interesting when they play the Bills and when they play when they play the 49ers within their next 3 games. If they're completely healthy and those with Byron Murphy on the field and their full front 7, how those games pan out, then I'll have much more confidence if they look really good in those games or come out on top. But the way they beat this Falcons team doesn't all of a sudden change my mind and make me think the Seahawks are as good as the Lions, Vikings.
Tristan, there is a fundamental difference from what you are trying to spin this as them being a top contender and them being a good team. There is room in between what you were describing them as and a Super Bowl contender. You have them down here. They're probably right about here. The Seahawks fans are not acting like they're up here. You are misrepresenting the fandom to try and get a little bit of
it's more so I was overrating what I thought the Falcons could be than I was underrating. I mean, I over-dramatized it a little bit.
Okay.
Like you haven't done that before.
Defensive back stance, line up the line of scrimmage, spin hands, backpedal, jam, backpedal, 5-yard penalty. Have some shame, have some pride. Good for the Seahawks for winning this game. I think the Falcons could still win the South. They need to stick to their game plan, get Algier more involved in the rushing attack, not abandon Bijan as much as they did, have some intestinal fortitude to stay with what they do. Unfortunately, I have limited faith in Kirk and their coaching staff. Not a Super Bowl contender, might not even be a playoff team if they don't win the division. On to the Sunday night game, and speaking of non-playoff teams, that Davante Adams trade did not work out. And that's going to be the storyline from this game. Oh, look how bad Rodgers looks, look how pathetic he is. The real storyline should be, we as analysts, fans, commentators, whatever we qualify as, need to stop second-guessing Mike Tomlin on some of these things. He was watching Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in practice for the past month and a half. He probably had a pretty good read on what that quarterback room looked like and realized, hey, Russ can do a little bit more for us in the air than Justin Fields can do on the ground or in the air. Special performance from Russ, considering how long it's been since he played last Christmas Eve. There were a few balls which he definitely benefited from having George Pickens on, but if you're going to throw up jump balls to somebody in the NFL, George Pickens would be one of the 5 guys I'd choose to go with. Special athletically gifted receiver there. And all in all, this greatly raises the Steelers' ceiling. If they can throw like this against other good defenses, I see no reason they cannot win 11, 12, maybe even 13 games. Maybe they're suddenly threatening the Ravens with how good their defense is and how bad the Ravens' secondary has looked throughout the year. Depends on how good their front 7 and Patrick Queen flows the ball. But all in all, big win for the Steelers. Changes how I feel about them, and that should be the storyline.
I felt different about the Steelers from my initial beginning season thoughts versus now, certainly. And now they look like a wild card team at this point. It looks almost guaranteed that they're at least going to be a wild card team. Do I think they're going to compete with the Ravens towards the end of the season? No, I still don't believe all that much in the Najee Harris, Jalen Warren combo behind that offensive line. I'm still not
100 yards and 20 carries, by the way.
I'm still not the biggest Russ believer. So from that standpoint, it's not like I think they can compete with the Ravens or the top teams in the AFC, but I certainly think they're going to be a playoff team at this point. And that's not the most interesting conversation to have about this game. You mentioned the Davante Adams trade, and which kind of goes along with the receiver room and the passing attack, but that's not the biggest disaster with this Jets organization. Woody Johnson, I think he saw all the headlines David Tepper was getting prior to the season. He was the most talked about owner for all the wrong reasons, and he got a little bit jealous. The defense, since he fired Robert Saleh, has been not good. Over the first 5 games they had this season, they averaged giving up 17 points a game. And over the last 2 weeks, they've given up 60 points total. So the defense, without Saleh calling the shots, has completely fallen apart. They give up 37 points to the Steelers of all teams, with Russell Wilson leading the way. The Steelers are not a great offense. Can they get the job done? They're still not great, especially when your defense is supposed to be one of the best in the NFL. And then on the offensive side of the ball, when you're Aaron Rodgers and you're the offensive coordinator and you're the general manager who constructed this team, you're not going to win football games with an immobile quarterback and absolutely zero run game. The only team in the NFL with less rush yards per game is the Dallas Cowboys. The Raiders are right above them, and then the other team that's right around them is also the Browns, who until they brought Nick Chubb back did not have a talented backfield. And this Jets team has Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. So the fact you have talented running backs and you're not using them, or you just can't generate any rushing yards, you're not then going to succeed no matter how talented your wide receiver room is or how accurate your quarterback is. So it is a complete failure from an organizational standpoint that there is zero commitment to the run to allow the weapons they've acquired and Aaron Rodgers to be successful. And maybe a lot of that falls on Aaron if he's the one who wants to throw these screen passes or throw the ball 40 times a game.
I think it's a bit of a lazy take to say the Jets defense has been terrible since Saul left. Multiple turnovers and a complete lack of offensive production, and just being left on the field because your team cannot drive will destroy any defense. This is the Jets' fault that they got thrust in on the 1 yard line because Davante Adams ran down and made an amazing touchdown saving tackle. Does that count as a defensive touchdown they gave up? I don't think the Jets defense is the issue. I don't think the issue was firing Saul. Saul is an incompetent head coach. Could not run the team, had a bad locker room presence. Part of that presence surely comes from Rodgers, but Saul being here would not have changed the outcome of this game. In fact, he may have given up more points and Rodgers would just keep pouting on the sideline. They might not have Davante Adams. It's not a well-run team. It's not a well-run locker room. The only silver lining you can point out with this team is their next 4 games are against the Patriots, the Texans, the Colts, and the Cardinals. If they roll into their bye week 5-6, or even if they somehow beat the Texans, which not happening, but if they beat the Texans because they're elite defense, and we saw CJ Stroud perform against the Packers defense, and they're 6-5 going into the bye week, maybe there's some hope. But this is just dysfunction of the highest order. They have not hit their ceiling. They have not capitalized on their potential. Their O-line is now really injured, which just cannot help the offense at all. And you have got to be in blow-it-up mode this offseason. Just lit that second-round pick on fire.
It also is a little tough coming fresh off of London with no bye week and then having to play again. So that
coming fresh off of London with no head coach, no bye week. It's not easy being Aaron Rodgers, man.
In defense a little bit.
What do we talk about with the Jets if they roll into the bye 5-6? They beat the bad teams they should beat and are close to 500 going into the final stretch of their season.
Nothing is going to change my opinion on them unless they find a way to run the ball successfully and build their run game more around that. Because even in the years Aaron Rodgers won his MVP, they still ran the ball at a high level with Aaron Jones and at the time A.J. Dillon when he spelled Aaron Jones. So the fact they're unable or completely uncommitted to it, I think completely signals that they have no chance at competing, even if they turn it around against bad teams.
Well, they were down 3 starting linemen. I can understand why they might not want to pound it up the middle. I mean, if they run it against bad teams, you're still going to say, oh, they beat the Cardinals, the Colts, and the Patriots. Big deal. You're never changing your mind. They could be a wild card team. You're not changing your mind. All in all, sad state of affairs. Better luck next year, New York. At least you have the Liberty and the Yankees. Yeah, they do not care about having the Liberty. They're happy about the Yankees.
That has been our reactions to the biggest things that happened in Week 7. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe, use code FIC on Underdog. You get bonus cash up to $1,000, and we'll see you in the next one.